Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another review, and as you can tell from the title up there, it is another entry in Oscar reviews. The following review was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, and it also was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. It, of course, is a horror film which is considered by many critics and some fans to be one of the greatest horror movies ever made. It is, of course, a film directed by Roman Polanski, and from what I understand, this was his first American film. It, of course, is Rosemary's Baby. Now, this is the first time I've ever seen the movie, and I'd heard some stuff about it, like, I'd already seen probably the most famous scene in the movie, when it was mentioned on Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments, which, that scene alone deserves to be on that list. Because it is kind of a spooky scene, which I will address it later. And after watching the movie, I can see why some would say it is. I would say I enjoyed the film, but would I put it on my favorite horror films list? Maybe near the back, but probably not a film I would find myself rewatching often. Let's just say I would probably watch The Exorcist more than I watched this, because I enjoyed The Exorcist more. But I'll say this is still at least I was entertained. It's kind of a character-driven one. I'll say with how the story is set up, this is one of those horror movies that could easily be turned into a play. Which I would actually like to see them do a play of Rosemary's Baby. It would be interesting. The only difficult scene would be the devil rape scene. But anyway, as I mentioned, it's usually critically appraised. It has a 98 on Rotten Tomatoes with the critics and 83 with the audience, and on IMDb it has an 8. Now, it is like The Exorcist, ironically, it is based off a novel. It is based off a novel that was published in 1967 by the late Ira Levin, and despite his first name, the first name it is a male. He was a novelist and a playwright. Some of the plays he wrote were No Time for Sergeants, which is from 56, Critics' Choice from 60, Death Trap from 78, which he got a Tony nomination for. He also wrote Drat the Cat, which was a musical. And some of his other novels include A Kiss Before Dying, Silver, a sequel to Rosemary's Baby he wrote called Son of Rosemary, which has nothing to do with the sequel to the movie, which was made first. And two of his other novels I actually recognized, and I was actually surprised to see them on here. And there are two other novels that were made into movies. And you'll probably recognize the titles. The Stepford Wives and The Boys from Brazil. If you don't know what that second one is about, it's about clones of Adolf Hitler. Now, of course, the director, Roman Polanski. I don't really think I need to say a lot about him. Fantastic director, kind of has a messed up personal life. We all know that story. You know, his pregnant wife was killed by the Manson family and all those crazy people. And then that whole thing involving the 13-year-old and all that. Then, of course, him fleeing. I'm not going to go into it. I'm not going to state my opinion on that whole thing, because that's a whole video to do that. But let's just say, I personally think that whole thing needs to come to an end. The whole, him having to be in fear and all that. But they need to come to some amicable decision regarding it, because if they don't, Polanski is just going to die in exile. But that's all I'm going to talk about it. Like I said, great director, has a messed up personal life. Some of his other films include the movie he directed right after this, Macbeth, which is actually a pretty interesting interpretation of Shakespeare's work. The 1974 film Chinatown, a 1999 film The Ninth Gate, and of course, the only one of his movies that I've seen all the way through, The Pianist. I'm Polish! Why the fucking coat? I'm cold. No, that's the one that Adrian Brody, I think he won the Oscar for that one. I don't remember I know he got nominated. I don't remember if he won off the top of my head. Now, the stars of this movie are Mia Farrow, John Cassavetes, Ruth Gordon, Sidney Blackmer, Maurice Evans, Ralph Bellamy, and this is one I was actually surprised to see in a small role, Charles Grodin. That's right, the dad from Beethoven himself, and of course, one of the guys from Midnight Run. I was surprised to see him. I was watching, I'm like, what do I think it is? Pause. Yeah, that's him. must have been one of his earliest film roles. He did a pretty good job with the small role he had now. Now, the plot of the movie is that Rosemary Woodhouse, Mia Farrow, she's a bright but somewhat naive young housewife, and her husband, Guy, Cassavetes' character, who is her husband, he's a struggling actor. They move into Bramsford, which is an antique New York City apartment building. Their neighbors are an elderly couple, Mina and Roman Cassavetes, who are played by Ruth Gordon and Sidney Blackmer. And you could tell not only they're elderly, but they're kind of eccentric. And the woman seems to be a little meddlesome. Not to the extent of like the stereotypical Italian woman, you know. Tato, why you always hurt me? Tato, you got to know what I have to do. I do not know why I'm doing the male Italian accent that I need to do. I mess it up, but you get the gist. Not like that. It's more like a kind one, but you know there's something odd with it. Now one day while she's doing laundry, Rosemary meets a young woman named Terry, who is being taken care of by the Cassavetes. And one evening, apparently she commits suicide. I'm not going to spoil the specifics of it, but you can tell from that alone something is going to be wrong. And I'm going to say, as the movie goes on, they get to see probably why she did it. And I have to say, I don't blame her one bit. Now, shortly after her death, Mina invites the Woodhouses to dinner, which they accept. And Guy seems to form a bond with them, though Rosemary, she seems to be a little reluctant to get too friendly with them. Probably the age difference and also probably sensing something. It's like, to quote Deadpool, "Halt! My common sense is tingling." Now that would be an interesting thing to see Deadpool comment on this movie. Her common sense is tingling. Now, a little bit after this, Rosemary is given a pendant, which is the same one that Terry had, which has this thing called tannis root in it, which gives off an odd smell. Now, a little bit after this guy lands a lead role in a play when the person who he's replacing goes blind. And a little bit after this, Rosemary has an unusual dream after eating some mousse given to her by the neighbors. And of course, she doesn't eat all of it because she notices a chalky undertaste, but the dream is very elaborate. Before I upload this, I'm going to see if I can find it on YouTube, because if there's one scene in the movie I think you should probably watch just to see how creative Polanski was with the film. It's this one scene, and it's the devil rape scene. And it's the slightly stereotypical devil, but you never see the full body in shot. It's always like bits and pieces, like a hand and just the eyes. And it works. And you could tell just by looking at Rosemary, she's freaked out what's going on. And the whole scene, it's done very creatively. This is why I just laugh at some people when they say that films aren't art. It all depends on... You could think that it's their prerogative, but I think it all depends on the guy behind the camera. Like, if you give someone who's a talentless hack the directing job, you know whether he's doing it to be artful or to make an entertaining film, you're probably going to fail in both cases. Even if they have like some talent, but like could do the camera, they could still do an entertaining film. But I prefer directors that actually have a lot of talent and know how to balance entertainment with being artful. It's a very thin thing you can do, and Polanski seems to be able to do that depending on the film, and here he seems to do that. He does the artful one. The entertaining one is all going to come down to personal taste, and I'll say I was drawn in by the story. I'm going to get that off my head. It's just that, I don't know, maybe it just didn't seem this story fit being a film. It probably would fit more being a play, like I said, but it was still interesting, the stuff they did. And maybe also the fact that this was a 60s movie, that maybe if this movie had been made at a different time, it would have had a bigger impact. Or maybe not as big as impact, but you could have done the characters in a different way. Maybe it's just the stuff of the time. Anyway, a little bit after the rape scene, Rosemary learns she's pregnant, and the baby is due in June of the following year, which is 1966. 666. That should be our first hint something's going wrong, if we assume that the devil rape scene was a hallucination. Now, from here, Rosemary gets begins to slowly suspect something is wrong. I'm not going to go into the specifics of it. It just involves a doctor, her husband's behavior, the neighbor's behavior, some stuff they gave her to drink, and it just snowballs until the climax. Now, one thing I will say, without spoiling the ending, is that as it goes on, you know pretty much what the ending is going to be, but what I like is that the film tries to make you think that's not going to happen. That it builds up that there might be another possibility, so but it makes you think what's going to happen. I already knew what was going to happen. I already knew from when I've known about this film what the ending was going to be, but for those of you who don't know what is actually going to happen, it kind of does snowball you a little bit, which I think is a creative thing about the film, because let's say you go into this movie only knowing just like the basic gist, it's just about, you know, like a demonic baby or something. A woman being impregnated with a demonic baby or something. And then you see the movie, you'd probably be impressed by how creative it was. But the heart of the movie is Rosemary and her seeing all this. Now, one of the things, like I mentioned before, that is kind of the thing of the time the movie came out. But this is the 60s, and I'm going to try to put this delicately, but women were viewed differently back in the 60s than they are now. Granted, they had more equal rights and stuff. It's just some of that patriarchal bullshit mentality was still there. I mean, if you do a lot of research, you find out about it. I mean, I mostly know about it because a lot of the stuff I watch actually mentions that mentality. I mean, you see a little bit of it in Sucker Punch. They mention it in some episodes of Law and Order. It's just bad and all that. And it's subtly there. Like, Guy's not an abusive husband, but you could tell through some of his subtle acts that it's there. Like, for example, how he plays off the scratches that Rosemary sees on her back the night after the double rape scene. He plays, I didn't want to miss baby night, and basically tries to play it off that he got a little rough with her when she was unconscious. If that were to happen nowadays, unless you're a woman that's into stuff like that, or like, oh, we really need the baby, we didn't want to miss the night, you would probably walk up to your husband and smack the crap out of him. But it's the 60s. Oh, we need a husband. Plays it off, because if I remember correctly, up until the 80s, spousal rape wasn't even a crime. So even if she didn't want to do, even if she didn't like that, nothing really could have done. And then of course, what we find out what the husband did, which I'm not going to spoil, but stuff like that. All she does is spit. That's all I'm going to say. Which I was like, okay, at least she did something. But it's just Rosemary, up until the end of the movie, she doesn't really stand up for herself. Like I said, she's kind of meek and something. And that's probably the thing is, probably one of the reasons I don't enjoy the movie as much as probably some other people do, is that you would expect, maybe it's a generational thing, I don't know, but I would have expected the character to be a little bit more, well, what do I put this? Intelligent, I guess. A little bit more forward. A little bit more, I wouldn't say in control, because this is kind of a situation you can't really be in control in. But just a little bit more, less demure, that's what I'd say. Less demure. And that's why I'd say if they wanted to remake Rosemary's Baby, I wouldn't really be against it that much. Granted, remake Her Disease, release it as a cure, but if it's a film that you kind of do have a few problems with, and how it works, I would be fine with them remaking Rosemary's Baby in a more contemporary setting, changing the character a little bit, but keeping the overall plot the same, and maybe making her run a little bit earlier, maybe make part of it like a road movie, like the original Rosemary's Baby, and add in a little bit of the Servants of Twilight to it. That's Servants of Twilight. That's a Dean Koontz book, for some of you who don't know. Well, I think it would just be interesting for that, but for what the film is, it's still an interesting time waster. It's one of those movies I'd say I'm glad I saw it, and I'd have to say I do recommend it to you horror fans up there if you want to see a film that's considered a classic, because I'll say, from that, I can see why it could be influential in this, the whole demonic child thing, because if I'm timing right, I think this movie came out before the original Omen, which, based on what I know, I have a feeling I'm going to like that movie a lot better than I like this movie. But I have a feeling without Rosemary's Baby, we probably wouldn't have had The Omen. That's just at least from a broad perspective, if you look along the history of horror timeline. And for a movie in the 60s, based on what I know of how morals and standards were. I noticed it took some chances. Because with Psycho 8 years before, the censors were complaining about how Hitchcock shot the shower scene, and you don't see anything. You just see skin. You don't see breasts. You don't see any vulva. You don't see anything like that. Yet 8 years later, Polanski could show breasts right before a rape scene. No critics seem to care. Granted, I haven't read up to see how they were, but the movie was released, so that should tell you something. It has an R rating, and it deserves that, I would say. Now, my rating for Rosemary's Baby. All honesty, it's going to be a difficult one. I'd say 3 out of 5 stars. I'd say it was a film I was entertained by it. The story did draw me in. It's just that, like I said, it's probably that generational thing about how some elements are played out. I know the story's faithful to the source material, so I can't knock it for that from what I understand, but it's just that the main character, I just didn't connect with her that well. I did a little bit because I know she wants to save her child, but she just seemed too demure, like I said. She should have been a little bit more headstrong. Well, like I said, that's the thing with the time, but, you know, just didn't grab me. And I will admit it, if I watch this film a second time and I like it more, I will be the first one to admit it. But for the first viewing, it just doesn't grab me like it has a lot of people. I'll still say it's a film I do respect, though. Oh, and okay, guys, I know I forgot to mention some things in that. I just was going on and on about, you know, the tone and all that. Now, as I mentioned, Polanski did a great directing job. The acting in the movie, I will say, is not the problem either. There's good acting. Mia Farrow, very believable as Rosemary. You sort of identify with her plight, at least from my point of view. But like I said, I hope her being too demure kind of kills it a little bit. But she still did a good performance. John Cassavetes did a good job as Guy. And while he's not an asshole character, by the end of the movie, you just want to give him a putazo like no other. That he'll fly off the screen, you will hit him so hard. Then, of course, Ruth Gordon and Sidney Blackmer as the Cassavetes. Same thing, you do want to smack them by the end. Maurice Evans is Hutch. He's a likable character, and you do feel for him when one thing happens to him. Ralph Bellamy is Dr. Abraham Saperstein. The moment you see him, you have a feeling there's something weird about him, but I'm not going to spoil what it is. But you know that you're not going to like him. Charles Grodin is Dr. Hill. He does a pretty good job, like I mentioned, for what he has to do, and you do kind of feel for him a little bit. The guy who they got to play the devil in that small role, even though he has no lines of dialogue and all he has is just brief shots, he fit that role perfectly. And I'll say Ruth Gordon, she did deserve her Academy Award for playing Mina Cassavetes. Because I don't really want to spoil much about it, but let's just say her performance. As you watch it, you can see she's fully into the character, and it really does add to some of the parts of the film that I do like wanting to smack the villains and all that. So you can see why the Academy gave it to her. I just want to real quickly see what performances she beat out. This would have been at the 69 one, I believe. Let's see. Go to the 70s and just scroll up. Okay, she beat out Lynn Carlin, Sandra Locke, Kay Medford, and Estella Parsons for films Faces, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, Funny Girl, and Rachel. Goldie Hawn won it the next year. This one thing I thought I would point out. And as for getting nominated for the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay, I could see that as well. And just out of curiosity, I want to see what it beat out as well. Let's see. Well, it didn't win, but you know what I mean. I want to see what beat it. It was beaten by The Lion in Winter, And the other nominees were The Odd Couple, Oliver, and Rachel. Yeah, the winner of the year before was In the Heat of the Night. What do they call you, boy? They call me Mr. Tibbs. Anyway, like I said before, 3 out of 5, and thanks for watching.